Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Our nation is still horrified and heartbroken over the brutal act of terror and hate that killed 49 and wounded many more in Orlando, Florida, just over a week ago. We stand in solidarity with the loved ones of those who are lost, with the LGBT community that suffered this unimaginable act of violence, and the entire Orlando community as they work to move forward from this tragedy. We can work together to disarm hate. Gun violence has become unacceptably commonplace in the country. The Orlando attack is only the latest and the most deadly mass shooting in the history of the United States. We have a responsibility to do more to keep guns out of the wrong hands. But, Mr. Speaker, it's not just mass shootings that should be our focus. Guns have taken more lives in this country since 1968 that were lost in all the wars this nation has ever fought. On average, more than 89 people each day die due to a gun violence, whether that's by homicide, suicide, or accident. That's more than 33,000 Americans being killed by guns each year. And just over the 3 years since Newtown, more than 111,300 people have been killed by someone using a gun in America. And in my state of Maryland, in 2015 alone, more than 340 Marylanders have lost their lives to homicides by guns. And yet, despite the national consensus for legislation to keep guns out of the hands of terrorists and convicted felons and domestic abusers, a vocal minority led by the National Rifle Association stands in the way of common sense proposals to keep our nation safe. Those voices are forcing a false choice between constitutional rights and safe streets. We can do both. Congress can and must enact laws that improve the public safety while respecting the Constitution. And this Congress has no right to hold moments of silence anymore and then do nothing to prevent the next tragedy. This is a moment of truth for Congress. We cannot have another moment of silence without action. We can and should expand and strengthen our background checks, pass the bipartisan no-fly, no-buy bill to keep guns out of the hands of suspected terrorists. And so today what we know is that across this country there are people who go to unlicensed dealers at gun shows and do what they could not do if they went to Walmart to get a gun, and that is to get one without passing a background check. These unlicensed dealers are a significant source of crimes in my state and across the country, with an estimate of 40% of all purchases made through them without a background check. And studies show that background checks actually do stop 170 felons, 50 domestic abusers, and 20 fugitives every single day from buying weapons. It works when you do it. Recent polling shows that universal background checks are universally supported across the political spectrum. A CBS poll released just last week showed that 89% of the public supports legislation requiring background checks, the low-hanging fruit, the common denominator. And that includes 97% of Democrats, 92% of Republicans, 82% of independents. Who's left out? The vocal minority led by the National Rifle Association. And let's talk about the National Rifle Association, Mr. Speaker, because they actually used to support universal background checks at gun shows. On May 27, 1999, Wayne LaPierre, the current executive president and CEO of the National Rifle Association, testified before the House Judiciary Committee about 1 month before Columbine, in which 12 high school students and 1 teacher were murdered. And he said this, and I quote, "We think it's reasonable to provide mandatory instant background checks for every sale at every gun show. No loopholes anywhere for anyone." And that is a direct quote from Wayne LaPierre of the National Rifle Association. When did they change? When it became politically expedient to do the job of the gun industry. And so, unfortunately, they flipped their position and they no longer support expanded background checks. And they've worked to prohibit that action here in Congress. And so I will say, Mr. Speaker, to Speaker Ryan, to my Republican colleagues, enough already. We are tired. We are done. It is past time for the Congress to listen to the American public instead of to the National Rifle Association, to listen to the overwhelming number of Democrats and Republicans and independents, and to take guns out of the hands of terrorists, convicted felons, and those who would do harm to others. No bill, no break. It's time to disarm hate.
Chair recognizes the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Lewis, for 5 minutes.